All right, good morning, everyone. I have 20 minutes and 53 slides, so 23.5 seconds per slide. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly. And it's because I have so many examples to tell you about. So first off, I'd just like to quickly go over the basics of machine learning, and then I'll get into the examples. Now, as you know, as fruit growers or involved in fruit growing, we deal with a very complex problem involving various factors relating to climate, soil, orchard design, and also management. And all of those factors have many components that we need to make sense of. But fortunately, we have a lot of sources of information these days. We have automatic weather stations, we have drones, satellite images, probes, proximal scanners, and apps on our phones. And then, of course, we have our trusty paper clipboards and Excel. Everyone's still using Excel. But how do we bring all of this data together? That's the big question. And the main common denominator between all of these data sets is geography. And I'm from a geography department, and I just like to express the importance when you collect data, knowing where you collected that data, because as soon as you have a coordinate to the data that you've collected, you can bring all of this data together based on that coordinate. And that's why geography and GIS, Geographic Information Systems, GPS, and remote sensing is so important for the agricultural industry, because we're working also over large areas. So these tools are really important for this problem that we're facing. But the problem is that it's just too much information. How do we make sense of all of this information? And now we have this new tool called AI, or machine learning, that allows computers to learn from data without explicit programming. And just to quickly explain the difference, when we create programs, we have a set of rules that we apply, or have a programmer apply to write code to solve a problem. And we feed data into that program, and it gives us answers. But machine learning works differently. You provide data, and it actually gives you patterns in your data, or you provide it with data and answers, and it finds the rules automatically in your data based on those answers. And if you have the rules, you can then automatically really build programs. So there's a loop between them. I'm going to talk about machine learning, but machine learning, most people say AI. Machine learning is just a subgroup of AI, and within machine learning, there's deep learning. I'm not going to get into all the technical things about the differences between these things, but the supervised machine learning is the most popular in the agricultural sector, and it involves getting the data together, manipulating the data, and preparing the data for analysis, building a model, training a model, testing that model, and then over time improve the model that you've built. So now I'm going to get into some examples. So the first set of examples, I'm going to start broad and then narrower to this field. The first example where we employed machine learning was to differentiate crop types at regional scale. And our two study areas were Swartland and Overberg, and the crop types. In this case, it's very small, but it's canola, your annual crops. And the purpose of this research was to determine how soon in the season can we differentiate these crops, because if you can differentiate among these crops early on, you can predict what the yield is going to be, and that is obviously very important for commodity trading and for food security purposes. And in this example, we found that we could predict the crop types, or differentiate the crop types as early as August to almost an 80% accuracy, which was quite good. And then and that's about a month or two before harvest. So obviously we'd like it to be sooner in the season than that, but still a successful research. This was a study also in crop type differentiation in the Volhard's irrigation scheme, and in this case we compared different data sets. So most of my research is about the use of satellite imagery or remote sensing data, remotely sensed data. So in this case, we compared aerial photography at 50 centimeter resolution, so similar to drones, satellite imagery at 10 meter resolution, and then LiDAR data, which is a laser scanner at 2 meter resolution, and the crop types in this case were non-agriculture, maize, orchards, groundnut, cotton, so broad classes. And we were able to classify or differentiate these crop types to an accuracy of 95% using a combination of these data sets. The best results were when we combined all three sources of data, but just using two of the data sets actually performed pretty well. Okay, so that's broad, and if it might not be as interesting for this audience to be able to differentiate between crop types. We also looked at soil property mapping, and this is a very difficult task because again, using satellite imagery, the satellite can only see the top soil. So obviously, if you want to determine soil properties, you need to also consider below the top soil, what's going on below the soil surface. So there are two approaches. The direct approach is where you wait for the soils to be bare, so just after plowing, for instance, and then you analyze the spectral properties of the soils. And the other approach is the indirect approach, where you consider the changes in the vegetation, the crops that are growing in the soil over time. And in our case, we were looking at salinity of soils, property that's related to waterlogging as well. And we tested both approaches, like I said, in the Volhard's irrigation scheme, and found that the indirect approach is actually working better, or is more practical, because, of course, especially in this audience, you're dealing with permanent crops, so you can't use the direct approach with permanent crops. And one of our study areas was the Breda River Valley, where we had a lot of permanent crops. So the indirect approach worked best. And machine learning was again used for differentiating between areas that were affected by salt accumulation and others. And eventually we built an automated system that were applied in 9 irrigation schemes throughout South Africa. And we built an app actually that automatically downloads the satellite imagery and classifies these areas that are affected by soil accumulation. Unfortunately, this web app that we developed, the salt accumulation and waterlogging monitoring system, is no longer in operation because we couldn't convince the government to pay for its maintenance. But the technology is still there. Okay, so that's soil properties. I think there was already a presentation mentioning TerraClim, also involved in that, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but essentially what we did was we used a lot of data about which cultivars are planted where, and now I'm talking about wine cultivars, and we fed that into a machine learning model to create this app through which you can draw in a field, and it will tell you which cultivar is most suited to be planted within that field. And The assumption that we made is that the 6,000 vineyards that we used to train the model, that some logic or some research went into the establishment of that orchard or vineyard in this case, or it was based on experience. So basically we used people's knowledge, people like you, to train the model, and now the model is basically giving back that knowledge to others who want to learn from it or to want to benefit from it. So please go and have a look at Terraclim. I'm going to go quickly through this one. This is just it's not relevant for you, but we're basically using satellite imagery to quantify the biomass for dairy farms. So every 5 days, a biomass reading is provided, and this allows the pasture or the dairy farmers to move their cows around from the one paddock to the other based on this satellite imagery. And for this, we used more than 200,000 plate meter biomass readings to train a machine learning model. And now this machine learning model is providing accuracies better than the plate monitor can provide. So within 200 kilograms per hectare accuracy. Okay, some fruit at last. So apple yield modeling. So this was a project that was funded by Hortgro. It was actually about inter-tree variability, and we, for this, Miku was also involved in that. We studied 3 orchards, Fuji orchards at Paul Kluwer, and we collected, I wasn't involved in the collection of data, but for 30 trees, the yield was collected. And we looked at various other things as well, but I'm just going to talk about yield. So yield per tree for 30 trees in these 3 orchards. We collected 1 drone image. We actually collected more than 1 drone image, but those images were not used in the machine learning. We also collected 3 satellite images at 50 centimeter resolution in October, December, and January, and 10-meter resolution satellite images, the free stuff that we can all get from October to February. So March was the harvest date. And we fed all of this into, well, it's only 30 trees, so we had a very small data set, but we fed that into a machine learning model and looked at how early or what is the impact of time on the classification or the modeling of yield per tree. And as you can see in the graph there, a month before harvest, we could reach an accuracy of 16 kilograms per tree when we used the satellite images as predictor variables. So only the satellite images was used as predictor variables. And the drone image actually, when we added the drone image to the satellite imagery, it reduced the accuracy of the yield modeling. And when we only used the drone image, which was taken in February, the accuracy was 29.9 kilograms. So yeah, you want obviously the number to be low. 16 is the best or highest accuracy in this case. And the 10-meter satellite imagery actually provided the best results in this study, which was very surprising to us. And we could take that model that we've developed on the 30 trees and then apply it back to each pixel, satellite image pixel and drone image pixel, to produce these maps. So the first map at the top there is 3 months before harvest, and then 2 months before harvest, and then in the bottom row is a month before harvest, actually more than a month before harvest. And you can see the variation within those 3 orchards when you apply this model back to the satellite imagery. And the graph there just shows the actual yield variation of those 30 trees. So there was actually a very big difference in yield between these 30 trees. So getting an accuracy of 16 kilograms was actually quite surprising to us, given the variation that we had in our input data. All right, so we also applied the same kind of technology for fruit size modeling, and we could actually use the satellite imagery to model the growth in the fruit during the season. And we separated the season into smaller periods, and you can see the maps that were produced at the different periods then that relates to the actual fruit size. And eventually, I think the accuracy was within a few millimeters that we got. Okay, the last example that I think I'll have time for is pecan yield tree modeling, and this was data provided by Karsten at Green Valley in the Northern Cape. And for this, we had 3 drone images, 10-meter satellite images again, and we had a visual assessment of each tree. Now, what is great about this project is that each tree, there were more than 30,000, can't remember now, trees that they measure the yield for each individual tree for the whole farm every year. And this is just one block, and basically my job was to relate the Excel sheets that they used to capture the yields to the actual trees and relate that to the drone imagery. So that was quite a big task, but we did that for all of these blocks, and now we can have a yield per tree map like this. And then I related this to the drone imagery. So this is a normalized difference, a red edge index. And if I go back, you see that there's not a big correlation between them if you just look at it like that. Area of the tree, and that's the volume of the tree based on the drone imagery. And there's a bit of a better correlation between the volume of the tree and the actual yield per tree. And on the left there you see the correlation between volume and kilograms per tree, and also the tree grading. So all of this data was fed into a machine learning model, and the graph that you see there is the prediction, the model prediction of actual yield per tree versus actual yield. So we took a sample, obviously, for building the model, and a separate sample for testing. And this is the test sample. And you can see that the R-square there is 0.84, which is pretty good, and a mean error of 7.8 kilograms per tree. Now the difficulty, so the whole point of this project was to predict yield for this year using historical yield data, or model that was built with historical data. So we applied it now for this year. What you see there, the graph at the bottom there, is the tree volume, and that's the main difficulty with this project, is that the trees are still very small or young, so they're still growing, and the volume is, there's a big variance in volume over time. So this is the prediction of yield for this year. Last year was an off year. This year seems to be good. I used 2022 data to build the model, and then applied it to the new drone imagery that was flown in 2023. And the prediction is then quite positive. So we'll see this year if it actually pans out to be correct. All right, I have 1 minute left, so I'm going to skip this one. This is also a Hordgrow project where we looked at the plum marbling viroid classification or detection using hyperspectral imagery, which we scanned the leaves of inoculated trees and identified important bands and got a really good classification accuracy of 95% for this viroid. But maybe I'll have an opportunity to present on that on another occasion. So the conclusion with 45 seconds left is that machine learning can be very effective to make sense of huge amounts of agricultural data. It's particularly well adept at finding relationship between disparate data sets, and especially if, for instance, yield versus remotely sensed data. But it requires enough training data, and that's been the problem in the fruit industry for a very long time. Unfortunately, now with the data co-op, we're solving that problem. We'll soon have enough data to do proper machine learning. And this, I throw this in there because this shows that the most effort with using machine learning is getting the data together. That's 60% of the effort. Then making the data available or prepare it for analysis is another 30%. Training the model, testing the model, improving the model is really very easy. So you, the guys that are doing most of the work when it comes to machining, and that is so important to understand. We're still scratching the surface in terms of data. So you saw there with the pecan nut example, you need a lot of data to build a proper model. So we're also scratching the surface in terms of research about how we can use machine learning to benefit agriculture, and there's still a lot to be done. And this is just an invite. If you need a mad professor to look at your data, please send me an email. Thank you very much.